Welcome back to Holy Ground Motherhood. Today I have the opportunity to have my first guest on the podcast. I get to talk with someone who has a really special connection with my family. This is Kim Goodman, author of Grace in Grief, Navigating Loss to Wholeness. We actually met once or twice when I was a baby, but this is our first real conversation as adults, so I'm very excited about that. Kim is the sister of a longtime family friend. It's someone that I call them aunt, even though they're not technically biologically related. And I'm so grateful that we get to reconnect today to talk about your story and the beautiful, hard, hope-filled journey of your book. So how are you doing today, Kim?
I'm doing wonderful.
That's
Thank you
great.
for having me as a guest today.
Thank you for being on. I would love to start out with you just sharing a little bit of your story. You raised 6 kids.
Yes.
And so what did motherhood look like for you from the start and just kind of generally throughout your season of motherhood? How would you kind of characterize what kind of mom you were?
So, yes, we have 6 kids, 5 sons and a daughter, one husband, um, one wonderful husband. My oldest actually would be 33, and then my youngest is 18. Our daughter came last, so she's got 5 older brothers. We started homeschooling when our kids were actually when Luke, our oldest, was 3 and a half. And we were living in Houston at the time, and I had a number of friends, and we started homeschooling together, just like a day a week, and getting together and just doing fun stuff with the kids. And it's interesting because I think this is how the Lord does in our lives. But I never had the thought, I'm going to homeschool all the way through high school, all of my kids. I mean, that never crossed my mind. That thought probably would have really intimidated me. I had been an ICU nurse, and I worked until our second son was born. And so started this homeschool journey very soon after. And literally it was every year, sometimes every semester, that we sought the Lord as to what was next and what it looked like, and sometimes changed curriculums. But we ended up homeschooling all the way through, from our oldest to our youngest, who just graduated this past year and just started at ORU in the fall a couple months ago. So we are now empty nesters. So
That's beautiful. I love that. I love that at kind of at every, new season that you sought the Lord and you're like, is this still working for our family? Would you consider yourself naturally pretty organized? Like, did that come naturally to you homeschooling, or did you feel like it was a lot of learning on the job?
yes, I'm somewhat organized. With my sister and I, she would probably say I am, because she homeschooled a lot more lax, the way that she schooled. I was a little bit more structured in how we homeschooled, but I was not one to lay out lesson plans and all that. I just had my books for the year that we were going to cover and what we were going to do, and then we just did that. So, but we were very diligent every single day. We homeschooled. So, yeah. I do want to digress for a second
Yeah.
because right now, all of our kids, we'll talk about it in a little while, but my oldest is in heaven. He passed away. He died when he was 22. But the rest of our kids all live here in town, in Tulsa. And I did this when I was growing up with my family. We would get together like every Wednesday night for a family night. And it was just a fun thing. And I had 2 sisters, my sister Tony, that you know well, and then my younger sister. And we would, a lot of times we got to come up with what the plan was, what game we were going to play, or what we were going to do for family night. And so it was something that we always looked forward to. And now our kids, some of them have moved out of town, out of state for a while, but right now everyone is back in Tulsa. And my husband is an entrepreneur, and my 2 oldest sons have started their own businesses, and then the next 2 sons work for them and for us. So everyone is in town, and so we've continued that tradition, as has Tony with her family. And every Sunday night we get together for family night, and it is one of the highlights of all of our week. I mean, all of the kids. But it is a joy to all of us. It is loud and wild. And now we have our first two grandbabies, and there is so much noise, and it's just wonderful. There's laughter and fun and sweet talk, and that's yeah.
That's really beautiful. I think that that's something that a lot of moms really dream about, is that really sweet relationship with your kids that continues into adulthood, where they want to spend time with you even as they're adults. Do you feel like there was anything that you did that really fostered that relationship of just enjoying spending time together as a family?
I absolutely do. I believe that we were very intentional as a family, as parents. First of all, getting to homeschool with them. So we got to input into their lives, and I wanted to be able to lay a foundation, a strong foundation for the Lord in their lives. And so we did that all those homeschooling years. We actually read many books about missionaries and their stories and their lives, and I loved immersing our family. And we did a lot from sunlight, and in our homeschool years, and a lot of reading. We'd start a school year with this shelf of books. This is what we're going to read this year, and we'd get through it all.
That's
And
awesome.
but it would, if our kids were 11 years old, they would be reading about an 11-year-old in China that's going through, when we're studying China, what they're going through. So those years were wonderful. And then I have to say, the Lord directed my husband years ago. He's always on Craigslist and looking and seeing what's out there. He found a kettle corn business that was for sale. And so we ended up as a family buying this kettle corn business because we homeschooled. We thought, people are always asking, well, what about their social skills when they are homeschooled?
Right.
And so this was a wonderful way to teach them, first of all, business, having all these sons, and to teach them how to work with people, problem solving, and just learning social skills. So that was a great thing that we got to do. And the other thing was, because we homeschooled, we were completely flexible with our schedule. So we did lots of traveling, lots of trips. We bought an old motorhome. Our first motorhome was nothing more than a shell, and literally there wasn't a couch in it or anything, but we had so many great times in that motorhome. Sold that, and then we bought another motorhome that was a little bit more conducive to being able to sit and not not sit on beanbags on the ground. And so we just made it work. But we'd go camping all the time. We'd do hiking. We did all kinds of outdoor activities. And we were very, very active as a family. And now it's really fun because I see my kids as they've grown up, and now they're starting their own families. We actually had 3 sons get married in this last year. And they all love to travel and to camp and to snow ski, snowboard, all the things that we did with them growing up. They do now with their friends and also still with us.
That's incredible. I love that. That's so inspirational. I mean, 6 kids, and it seemed like you guys were very fearless in, this is the way that we want to live, and kids are just going to come along in tow with that. What maybe encouragement would you give to moms? Because it's something that I see, honestly, a lot in my generation, where moms have a lot less than 6 kids and they're not homeschooling, and they're still incredibly overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say you still felt that overwhelm, or what maybe was your perspective or how you lived that really allowed you to pursue things so fearlessly, in terms of, we're gonna buy this popcorn business, we're gonna get this motor home, we're gonna just live life the way that we want to, and the kids are gonna come alongside that?
Oh, that's a good question. I remember feeling overwhelmed when we were outnumbered with kids, because there's 2 of us. When we hit 3, it was like, oh, wow, just this feeling of being overwhelmed. But you're right. We did decide that we were just going to do life. I mean, I remember taking Luke on a camping trip when he was 5 weeks old with this group of 40 friends.
What?
We'd all go do trips like this, and we were camping. And at one point we were out on the water skiing. And so I left Luke in the care of some of our really close friends, and he was sitting in a swing in the shade, and the swing would swing. And when it hit the top part of the swing, there was a little bit of sunshine. So my 5.5-week-old baby got a sunburned nose, and I felt
Oh,
like the most
so
negligent
funny.
mama. Um, but anyway, we'd take him, we'd put him in a backpack, and we'd go hiking, and we just
Wow.
never let it slow us down. I have had the blessing of the most amazing sister, and just being
Mm.
able to do life with her, and she just walks in so much wisdom. And she encouraged me years ago to enjoy my children, and just to, when
Mm.
I felt exhausted and overwhelmed, to sit back, sit on the couch, and watch the kids interact and watch them play, and just delight in them. And I
Wow.
think that we miss that a lot of times, and we get stressed and we get overwhelmed with all the things we have to do, and we don't just enjoy them, enjoy the moment, enjoy those sweet precious babies that are so fresh from heaven, and just every single stage along the way. And so I learned to do that, my sister learned to do that, and I think it really uh, dissipated the
Mm.
overwhelmed feeling, to just sit and love and enjoy them and let them feed our souls.
Wow, that's beautiful. I love that. That's such an encouragement to me. I mean, honestly, and that's such a good challenge to me to slow down and just enjoy my kids instead of getting caught up in, what do I have to do today or what are the tasks that I have
Right.
to accomplish. So,
Because those tasks are going to wait for you.
yeah.
And also, I think with homeschooling, to the moms that are out there that do homeschool, I think I just want to say grace, grace, grace. And Grace is my middle name. And
Yeah.
the Lord named me that, I have realized in my life, because that's one of the messages, my lifetime messages. And that's why the book is called Grace in
Yeah.
Grief, because there were so many times when we just had to give ourselves grace, and
Mm.
that we as moms need to give ourselves grace. And when you're homeschooling a kindergartner, you don't have to get every single thing done. You don't. and
Sure.
and they are not going to suffer in their education if you didn't get their math lesson done today.
Right.
And so just grace. And on those days, and on those days when you're feeling overwhelmed or you need to get more done, give yourself the grace. I
Mm.
mean, we've graduated now. 4 of them have graduated college, and the other one, another one is in college right now. We graduated summa cum laude, who was actually number 1 in top of his class. And we've graduated several magna cum laudes. And so it's the grace of God that got us there. I had those that were very academic, those that were way less academic.
Mm.
And so the Lord puts such a beautiful variety in families, I feel like. And with 6 kids, there was lots of variety.
Did you always knew you were going to have a big family? Did it happen organically, just kind of with each one? You're like, we feel like our family's not done yet. How did that come about?
That's a great question. No, I absolutely had no idea that I was going to have 6 kids. Actually, in our wedding, I remember someone, the pastor that was marrying us, made a comment about in little Goodmans when they come along, and my husband got this look of on his face, turned around, looked at the audience. The whole audience just cracks up laughing.
So funny.
He's hilarious anyway. But no, when I was a young girl, I thought I had to have 2 or 3 kids. I really thought I'd have two boys and then a girl, and that would be it. Because I only grew up with sisters, and I really always wanted a brother. But I never imagined in my wildest dreams that I would have 6. And Tony, when we were growing up, on the other hand, my sister used to always say, yeah, I'm going to have 6 kids, and then I'm going to adopt 6 more. And I'm like, Tony, how are you going to feed these kids? How are you going to put them through college? And, oh, the Lord's going to provide. Well, that is exactly how she has lived her life.
Yeah.
And she did end up having 10 kids with her one husband. And the Lord has provided every step along the way.
You mentioned you had, 5 boys and then a girl. Were you like, were trying for that girl, or was there anything specific when you had that girl?
That's a great question also. My husband, between he and I, he didn't know if he wanted to have kids when we got married, like I just alluded to. And so each child, that's an area that we found that, I remember a friend of my sister's who made the comment that that's one of the sweetest ways that the Lord conforms us into his image, into his character, is through our children. And we didn't plan specifically for any of the children. The only one, the second one, when he was coming along, when we were planning, we decided we were going to have another child, but we got pregnant 2 months before we started trying. In other words, it was all Jesus. It was all
Yeah.
the Lord. So we just learned to put that in his hands. But I always knew in my heart that I had a girl coming. And after we had 5 sons, my husband was very finished and very happy to be finished. And then we had a girl.
Wow.
And so that was just pure gift. All of our children, every one of them, have just been pure gift from the Lord.
I love that. All right, so let's talk about the book. So you went through something that is probably most parents would say is their worst nightmare. Are you willing to share that story?
Absolutely. And I want to even preface it with this thought. Jace, who is now our oldest son, because Luke is with Jesus, our oldest living son, was walking through Walmart one day about a month and a half before this happened, and the Lord just dropped in his heart, your family is about to go through the most challenging thing that you've ever walked through, but you are going to become closer and tighter as a family than you've ever been because of it. And that is so rung true. We had just spent a week snowboarding with the families. Greg and I snow ski, all the kids board, and we had dropped our oldest son, Luke, at a bus station that morning. He was going to make a couple bus connections and then join his cousins to board for the next 4 or 5 days. And then we were going to drive back to Tulsa that morning. So we had just had this glorious week with the whole family, snow skiing, snowboarding. And we got home that night about 8 o'clock. At 2 a.m, we got a knock on our door, and it was the police, and they said, we just got a call from Summit County, and I didn't know where Summit County was, and my husband gasped, and that was where we had just left. That was the name of the county where we had just left in Colorado, and they told us that our son had a bullet to the head, and they believed it was self-inflicted. And gosh, it's been 10 years, and that was the most devastating news, obviously, we've ever had in our lives. And the Lord has been so faithful through this journey. The statistics are crazy. I think it's 70% of marriages don't survive the loss of a child. And to survive that loss, I would have to say that it was only Jesus. He was our anchor. Literally, there were probably the entire first year, there was some time in the day that Greg and I would just hold one another and sob. And I had lost my younger sister, Allie, died when she was 21. And my parents didn't know anything about how to walk us through as kids. I was 23 at the time. Tony was 24. And I had actually just graduated from ORU in nursing school, and I had just moved back down to Houston. And so I had been gone for 4 years, and I was living back at home with my parents when my sister died. And I had zero support group because I had just moved from college back down to Houston. Having been gone for 4 years, my friends were all gone all over the place. And it was really rough not having any support system. My parents, my dad had his own business, took a job in Waxahachie, which was hours away. literally leaving me with nobody. I've got a new job working in the med center and nobody. And so I knew that community was huge to get through this together with our family. I was very intentional about being very transparent with the kids and talking about death and walking through our feelings. And on family nights, we would touch base, and not every week because we needed to let it go. And at one point, I remember we were on the way to a vacation, and I brought up something, and my oldest son, Jay, said, Mom, can we not talk about this? I don't want to talk about this right now. I want to just have a vacation. And so I'm like, absolutely, honey. And so we didn't talk about it. And actually, days into the vacation, he brought up things and said, I actually really do want to share some thoughts that I'm dealing with and struggling with. And so related to Luke's death. And so in the process, we were very transparent and sharing our hearts and being there and being such a support group to one another. I remember reading in a grieving book, Cry Why the Tears Come Easily. And so Greg and I did that. We literally would sob together for the first year. And it was the most cleansing, healing thing to be able to cry together and to give one another grace and not trying to cast blame, but just this is something we're all walking through, and it's really hard in the face of such an overwhelming grief like that to not feel like you're the only one that's carrying this grief that is so hard. And even like I remember my sister saying to me, Kim, you're not the only one that lost Luke. And it was arresting to me to realize, oh, wow, yeah, everyone else is carrying this. I've lost a son. She's lost a nephew. So I actually was walking up to the barn, getting ready for loading for a kettle corn event that we were getting ready to have. And this is about a year and a half after Luke died. And I was listening to this podcast by John and Lisa Bevere. And they said in the podcast, you need to write. You need to write your story. The world needs to hear your story. And wow, the Lord just hit me like, I want you to write. And I said, okay, Lord, I'll write. What do you want me to write about? And it was like he laughed. And he's like, well, you've just filled a journal and a half in this last year and a half. I want you to write about your story with Luke and what's in the journal. And so just to backtrack a little bit, a friend of mine about a year and a half before Luke died challenged me. She and I were both going to start a list from Ann Voskamp's book, 1,000 Gifts, of 1,000 things that we were thankful for. And so I had been working on a list. Actually, my first day, I sat down and I wrote out about 90 things that I was thankful for. But then I would just write every morning in my time with Jesus. I would sit down and think about the day before, think about the ways that I saw him meet me the day before. And I would write probably 3 to 12 things that I was grateful for. And so I was at about 550 on my thankful list when Luke passed away. And it was like the Lord said to me, okay, you're already on this journey. It had already transformed my thinking. And it had taught me to look for his goodness and to look for the gifts that he gave me on a daily basis. Sometimes very ordinary things, sometimes completely supernatural, wild things that he did and that he did for us. And so my journal became the basis of Grace and Grief. And the Lord really impressed on me during the subtitle is Navigating Loss to Wholeness. I've known a few families that have lost a child, and most families wear that grief. They wear that grief for years. And for us, it was like the Lord worked us through to a place where our grief, our loss does not define us. I'm absolutely convinced the Lord wants us to walk in joy, in peace, in love. And that's what sets us apart as believers. And so even in the midst of the most difficult thing that we had ever walked through, we walked in joy and we walked in peace, and we didn't, on the days when it felt like a tsunami was going to bear us under with the loss that we had experienced, we learned to give that to Jesus and to let him truly become the anchor of our souls. And he met us. And so I don't know how anyone can go through a loss of that magnitude without Jesus and without the difference that he makes every day, every moment in our lives. We bought a timeshare years ago in Vail with kettle corn bartering money. And I just got back this past week. My sister Tony and her husband went with Greg and I to Vail. And on the way there, she made a comment that she said, there is not an hour in my life that goes by when I am not aware of the goodness of God and how he meets us on such a daily, intimate basis. And with my thankful journal, I guess I'm on 20,000 and something now, because I've continued doing that through the years.
It's amazing.
And I write it out in the morning. And so that's when I stop and think. And I realize if I didn't do that, I would miss so many things that the Lord did for me on the day before and not stop and thank him. Like the story of the 10 lepers and only one came back to thank him. I would miss so many things if I wasn't intentional about stopping and doing that. But having a thankful journal, and Tony calls hers Kisses from God, and she dictates it into her phone. And so she's doing it constantly all day long because she's got her phone with her. I'm just doing it mostly in the morning, and either way works. Doing that has opened my eyes to see his goodness and how not just me, but every single one of us, he is reaching out to us every single day, every hour, literally every moment of our life, that he's there for us and he's meeting us if we allow him to. When I was writing the book and we were trying to come up with a name, and we came and decided on Grace and Grief, and I put as the author by Kim Goodman. And my third son, Rob, said, Mom, your middle name is Grace. That's such a huge part of your journey. You need your full name in there. So it does say by Kimberly Grace Goodman.
Love that. How do you feel like your faith shifted in that season? Do you feel like there were things that completely transformed, or even some things that broke down and got built up into something else? Or were there beliefs about God that were really solidified in that time?
That's a good question. When my mom lost Allie, my sister, she went through such a crisis of faith for, I would say, decades. And my mom was such a warrior in the spirit realm, and she was an intercessor, and she believed until the minute that Allie died. She had an incurable disease, cystic fibrosis, so that was terminal throughout her life. She believed until the minute Allie died that the Lord was going to heal her. And so I watched my mom walk through this crisis of faith and made the decision that I was going to cling to him. And I do have to say that my thankful journal made all the difference, because it kept enforcing and reinforcing to me every single day how he was meeting me and meeting our family. And I'll just tell you one wild thing that is in there. So we have a hot tub, and we would go out as a family and sit in the hot tub, and we'd be out there for an hour and a half and sharing stories and all that. One night we're out there, and you could still see the clouds. And I look up, you know how clouds can make shapes or whatever. And I said to the family, oh, what do y'all see in the clouds? And they're like, Mom, it says Luke with the clouds. And we're like, what? I mean, all of us saw it. We're out there. And then then we're all just marveling and saying, "Oh, you are amazing." And so then we're sitting there talking, and I look up a few minutes later, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you guys look!" And it had turned into the U had morphed into like a heart for an O, and it said love. It was like, wow, you are amazing, God. But we
Wow.
just had some crazy things like that that were just mind blowing ways that the Lord met us, and just to let us see His goodness and let us know that He was there for us. And I have to say this about having a thankful journal. A few years later, I decided I've got this, and I'm I don't have to keep writing in a journal every day, and I've got this. I'm thankful, and so I stopped doing that for a little bit, and I found so quickly. And Ann Voskamp said this in her book: unless we are intentional about giving praise to the Lord, we unintentionally give way to grumbling and complaining and giving our family grief. And
Mm.
so I realized so quickly that I began in that mess, and where I just start grumbling and complaining, and thankful is an antidote. Thankfulness is an antidote to that. I have found that being thankful completely changes our perspective. And I think it's all in our perspective, how we view life, how we see life.
Amen. Oh, I totally agree. I have a mentor who's really passionate about gratitude. And so that's been something that she's challenged me in a lot as I'm feeling those moments of overwhelm, even not having a lot of kids, and I still feel overwhelmed, or I get stressed, or start having getting depressed, and turning to gratitude. It just changes our perspective to seeing the Lord in
Mm-hmm.
our life and where He's working. You mentioned the word wholeness a couple of times. So what does that mean to you of healing into wholeness rather than maybe just moving on from something?
I have found that wholeness, and I've seen it modeled where one of my closest friends lost a brother, and 8.5 years later, she was in the same place that she turned to alcohol. People turn to one thing or the other. When we turn to Jesus, He brings us into a place of wholeness where we truly are healed inside, and inside of us we can walk in a place of peace and joy. And that's what he promises to give us an abundant life, and that's what He wants our lives to look like for us. And so choosing to park in that place in His peace and joy. I remember the verse that He gave me during that time was Romans 15:13. May the God of peace may the God of hope fill you with joy and peace as you trust in Him, and may you overflow with hope through the power of the Holy Spirit.
Mm.
Um, that was the verse He gave me that walked me through that time and carried me through that time, because and even right now, there's so much going on in our world that's pulling on every one of us, and especially as young moms. In your first podcast, you talked about your generation turning to Google, to AI for the answers to questions. There's so much that's going on in our world, and that we are being so inundated with information. It's hard to find hope
Yeah.
sometimes, and it's easy to lose hope and to feel discouragement. And so He became that for me. He became that rock of hope that filled me with His joy and peace. And I found that I had to be intentional, choosing the thoughts that I dealt with, choosing to silence. We have a very real enemy of our souls who comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. He destroyed my son. If we listen to his lies, which he's always trying to bring to us, um, then we don't walk in wholeness. We don't walk in peace and joy. And it is in choosing to listen to the Lord and what He's speaking to us in His love and His promises, and allowing Him to give us His grace, His strength. That's when we can walk in wholeness.
You mentioned that there being more to the story.
So Luke grew up being very into video games. And there is very much an agenda behind video games. And the site that he loved was called Highly Addictive Video Games. And he laughed telling me that. And I'm like, that's exactly what they were. Well, and with homeschooling, there's a lot of extra time on kids' hands. And so we put limits on how much time they could spend a day on video games, but they violated that. And there were times they'd be in the middle of the night, sneaking and playing video games. And because they knew they weren't supposed to be doing that, the enemy, Satan, is filling their head with guilt, with his lies. So I feel like Luke struggled with guilt about that. I know that he did. I feel like that he struggled with some depression because of that. He never was medically depressed, but I know that that was a struggle, and the video games was a huge thing. And so when he was in Colorado, he had met up with his cousin, and there was a dispensary on the corner there, and marijuana was not legalized in Oklahoma yet, but it was in Colorado. And so he and his cousin decided that they were going to go try edibles and marijuana laced into candy. And so Luke had never tried an edible before, and he took one and had no effect. And then he ate another one. I mean, honestly, who eats just one piece of candy, right?
Sure.
I remember when we flew to Colorado to go to his bedside after he shot himself. A woman told us, I took an edible once when I first moved to Colorado, and she said, and this is a large woman, she's like, I was out on the floor for 2 days with one edible. Luke ended up having 5 edibles before he felt any effects of it. And then when it hit him like a wall. And he started talking like out of his head. And I would have to say this demonic voice. It was a voice that was not his own. Started coming out of him and doing all this rap. And his cousin, who's like his best friend, has never seen Luke act like this. So his cousin is like, hey, Luke, it's almost 10 o'clock. We're going to head down to the hot tub. He was there with him and his fiance at the time and her mom, who was a police officer. And so he's like, the hot tub's about to close. We're going to head down there. Come on with us. And Luke just keeps talking, looks at him weird, just keeps talking all this rap stuff. And then, so my nephew thinks, you know what? He just needs to diffuse. And so he's completely under the influence of edibles. Yeah. And so they leave the room and go down to the hot tub. As they're walking down, the mom is walking back to the room. So it's not even been 5 minutes since they left the room. She walks in the room and she hears a gunshot go off and she hits the floor. So Luke had shot himself. So the Lord spoke to me that night, in the middle of the night. The next morning, he spoke to me and showed me what happened with Luke, that the tapes that the enemy had run all those years of him dealing with guilt over video games, and that Satan said to him, you need to take your life, you need to pull the trigger right now or you never will. And he did, like that fast. As soon as they leave the room, he takes his life. So it was 100% under the influence of edibles. I don't know how premeditated. I know that there was a note on his laptop from years before when he had struggled when he first went off to college and struggled with, and he said in there something about the video games and the struggle of that. So, but he had graduated college. He had just graduated college, was in such a wonderful, healthy place in his life and his loving the Lord, working out, 5 or 6 days a week. just doing great at this time when all of this happens. I would venture to say most people on planet Earth at some point in their lives or another have had thoughts, and whether they stopped and entertained them or whether they went recognized that's the enemy that's throwing that in and said, yeah, yeah, stop, I don't want to hear this. But at some point in their lives, for some reason, at the lowest place in their lives or at a low place, have considered or have had a thought, even if it's brief and fleeting. And I believe that's very much a trick of the enemy. And I think it's so important to recognize and to call out the enemy and recognize he's the one putting those thoughts there. Yeah. And that's not where I'm going to choose to park. I'm going to go to the scripture and say what the Lord says about me, and that I am precious and beloved in his sight, and believe him instead of the lies of the enemy.
Did you feel like that was something you learned in that process? Like, was there ever a point for you where the temptation to get angry or let the grief become a tsunami and completely overwhelm you? How did you end up fighting that and fighting the lies of the enemy in that season?
I have to go back to my thankful journal, because literally every morning seeing his goodness and how he had met me the day before completely shifted my whole outlook. And that played such a huge part, which is why I ended up writing a book. It played such a huge part in overcoming grief and that tsunami when I felt like that. And when I felt like this whole fuzzy blur or something, like the rest of the world was going on living and I'm still here. And I'm still dealing with this. And but the Lord used that to bring me out of that and get us all back on a road to where we could speak into others' lives, we could minister into others' lives because of what we've been through. Because sometimes, unless you've walked through something yourself, you can't really fully be there for someone else. And I find that the Lord uses everything in our lives. He uses everything we've walked through, everything we've gone through.
If there is a mom listening to this episode that maybe she is in the beginning stages of grief, whether it's, the death of a loved one or a miscarriage, divorce, maybe a crisis of faith, what encouragement would you give to them? What would you encourage them to do, and how to seek the Lord in that first part?
I would first encourage them to be still and know that he is God and allow him to meet them. And I find the best way for me to do that is in nature. I sense him more fully when I'm in nature than any other way. And that's just been a way he's always met me. Even going and finding a lake to look out over or some beautiful scenic place or whatever, or wherever it is, but going out in nature and being still and knowing that he is God and the difference that he can make. It's not always a feeling. It's not always a warm fuzzy from him. He doesn't always meet us that way, but he does meet us. And so when it seemed like he wasn't, the discipline of stopping and saying, how did you meet me yesterday? Oh, Father, you did this, you did this. It changed me.
I love that. I have a couple of questions that I am hoping to ask every guest at the end of each podcast. So before we get into those and then wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to share, or anything else that's on your heart?
Yes, I think this one thought: life never ends up looking just like we thought it was going to look, but it's a journey, and I am convinced the Lord is always conforming us into his image if we allow him to. and working on our character. He's more concerned about our character than our comfort. Um, and so to just trust him in the journey. And in a place of trust, that's where you can walk in joy and peace. When you can choose to trust him. And it's a choice.
When you look back, where do you see Jesus most clearly in the everyday, ordinary moments of motherhood?
I would have to say, when I told you that we took a lot of trips, we did a lot of camping, a lot of hiking. I would say the moments of family, just having fun together and doing all the crazy things that we did. And when I talked about sitting and watching and enjoying your kids, whether ours had a slack line stretched out between two trees and they're walking and doing, they're always doing something, and boys never stop. There's always something that they're doing. And just enjoying and seeing his goodness in those moments, and allowing it to feed me, which it really did. I mean, it just would feed my soul to stop and enjoy the gifts. And they're all around us, but especially I feel like in our families, if we stop and see and recognize them. And I do have to say this, there's a lot of families that for one reason or another have drifted apart, have become divided. I remember Jace saying after Luke died, Mom, so much could have been resolved with Luke and I, with just childhood, boyhood issues that they had, that they allowed them to push them apart in ways. I mean, they were still brothers that loved each other, but they could have been closer. They could have. And I taught my kids all their growing up years, I spoke this into their lives. Guys, if you will treat each other right, you will become each other's best friends for life. And I see that now. I mean, from my 30-year-old now, 31, down to my 18-year-old, they are each other's best friends, and they love to get together. And whether Greg and I are with them or not, they'll reach out and they'll get together and do things together all the time. They're so much of each other's lives and joy. And so they've become that. And but I remember Jay saying, Mom, so much could have been resolved with just a single conversation. And so that has been something that really spoke to me and has been huge to me in my life since then. We just don't have time in our lives to allow offense. John Bevere wrote a book called The Bait of Satan, and the whole basis of it is offense. And that is absolutely one of Satan's biggest traps. If we can become offended at somebody, he can separate us. And so if we choose to not allow offense and choose to communicate, and especially with family members, and I mean, you hear these stories of people being estranged from their parents or their siblings, and they haven't talked in 17 years, and that's not his plan. And a single conversation can completely change that. So I would encourage everyone listening to communicate. Never be afraid to have that conversation.
It's so good. You talked a little bit about community being really important in, I mean, even just in you were raising your kids in that relationship with your sister, but then also in the grief, having that community, having that support system. So how would you encourage a mom to build her own village or support system if she feels like she doesn't have one readily available?
Great question. When I first got married, I got this email and it said, okay, so you've gotten married. Congratulations. That's wonderful. Now get yourself some girlfriends. And I was like, wait, what? I just got married to my best friend. And he's the one that I want to do life with and confide in. But I have absolutely found the absolute wisdom in that, and to get yourself some girlfriends, because I have groups of girlfriends, and we kind of have them in our lives that I don't let go of. And like on an annual basis, I get together with friends that live, I'm in Tulsa, they live back in Texas, from that I went to high school with, and we'll get together and have a girlfriends reunion, or girlfriends that are from my ORU days, or just whatever. And then I have women like my sister and other really close friends that have come alongside and have walked life with me, and we've walked it together, and we can cry together, we can laugh together, we can share our greatest joys, our biggest fears. But there's nothing like women, relating to women. And your husband, because he's a man, he's just wired differently. Yeah. And as wonderful as they are, and as much as they absolutely can be our best friend, I've years later in our marriage realized that with my husband, you absolutely are my best friend on the planet. And yet there's nothing like girlfriends and what you can share with them. And so I absolutely encourage young women. When Greg and I first got married, I alluded to, we started homeschooling when Luke was 3.5 with this group of women. Our common denominator, we were all believers, and we were in Houston, so we're spread out in churches all over Houston. We didn't go to the same church. We got together and we started doing these dinner groups, and we once a month we'd be at a different person's house, and it was potluck. Everybody would bring some dish, and we just formed these friendships that are thriving today, even though we're all spread out in states across the United States now. But they're thriving because of just all we invested. Then we end up having our first round of children together, our second round of children, and so it's just been so amazing through all these years. Our kids now are having kids of their own, and we're all still friends. So yeah, I encourage awesome. Women to get yourself some girlfriends and mentor. Find a woman in your life that you can look to, that you can respect, and different women are going to offer different things, and so that you can go to about these questions or whatever. But find yourself a mentor. And I remember my mom praying diligently for a mentor, and it seemed like no mentor ever came along. And she realized decades later in life, the Holy Spirit had become her mentor. Then one of my dearest friends, her mom, wrote this book, and I was reading this book, and as I'm reading it, I'm like, wow, this is everything my mom taught me when I was growing up. Come to find out, she had the same story. She could not find a mentor, and the Holy Spirit became her mentor. And it was just, this is wild. And then both the moms became such great friends. So if he doesn't materialize one around you, the Holy Spirit will mentor you. But I do encourage you to look for women that you respect and take them to lunch, buy their lunch that you can have through your life to go to and to bring questions to. And yeah,
that's great. Agreed. All right, my last question you kind of already answered. Is there a verse or passage of scripture that has been significant in your journey of motherhood? And you shared that verse in Romans
15:13. I would also say Isaiah 26:3. And it is, he will keep in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on thee, whose heart trusts in thee. And like I said before, trust is a choice. When we choose to trust in him, he does. He keeps us in perfect peace. And that's where he wants us to live.
That's great. It's a great spot to wrap up. All right. Well, thank you for sharing your story, and with such honesty and hope, and being willing to be an encouragement to women who are going through something similar or just their own type of grief. I think it's going to speak deeply to so many people, that what they're walking through, that there is hope, and that Jesus is there in the midst of their pain and walking them through it. So if you are listening and you'd like to learn more about Kim's journey or dive deeper into what we talked about today, her book is Grace in Grief, Navigating Loss to Wholeness, and it is linked in the show notes of today's episode. So Kim, thank you so much again for your time and for the grace that you've shared with us today.
Thank you.